Hello everybody, welcome to Shell Lectures. So today we'll be dealing with the part 2 of NCERT class 11 physics chapter 2 that we have been discussing in part 1. Small part is over, and today we'll be dealing with the next part, that is part 2, and today we'll be starting with the range of length. So in the previous video I have talked about how to measure length and all that. So you can refer to my previous video and then continue with this. So range of length is nothing but what is the minimum, the most minimum and the most maximum length. So the most minimum length is nothing but the size of proton, which is just 10 power minus 15 meter. So the lowest length is 10 power minus 15 meter. What about the largest length, that is 10 power 26 meter? That is the extent of the universe that can be known or that can be observed. So the extent of the most observable universe is 10 power 26 and 10 power minus 15. So the difference between these two comes as the range of lengths. So now how can we measure length? The units of length, we are very aware of that earlier. That is, very low lengths can be measured by Fermi meter. That is, 1 Fermi is nearly 10 power minus 15 meter, and then we have nanometer, which is 10 power minus 9 meter, and then we have Armstrong, which is 10 power minus 10 meter. So all of these are used for measuring small lengths. What about large lengths? We have things known as 1 astronomical unit. 1 astronomical unit is nothing but the distance of sun from earth. Okay, so the distance of sun from earth is known as 1 astronomical unit, and the value is nearly 1.496 into 10 to the power 11 meter. So this is the distance between sun and earth. And 1 light year, that is the distance that light can travel in 1 year with the velocity 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. That is c, speed of light, 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. With this velocity, the distance that light travels in 1 year is 9.46 into 10 to the power 15 meter. So this is 1 light year. Okay, also we have these two are the very large, these two are the units which are used to measure very large quantities, and also we have 1 parsec, which is 3.08 into 10 to the power 16 meter, and that is nothing but if this is Earth's orbit, if this is Earth and if this is Earth's orbit, that is if this is Sun and this is the Earth's orbit. Okay, so if this is Sun and if this is the Earth's orbit, the orbit of the Earth, the radius of the Earth, which at a greater distance, the radius of the Earth which at a greater distance subtends an angle of, that is the angle which is being subtended will be 1 arc second. Okay, so if an angle called 1 arc second is subtended by the orbit of the Earth at one point, then the distance is known as 1 parsec, and the distance is 3.08 into 10 to the power 16 meter. So if this is the orbit of the Earth, the radius of the Earth, that is these all are radius of Earth, the average radius of the Earth which subtends 1 arc second with the 1 arc second with the Earth's orbit is known as 1 parsec, and its value is 3.08 into 10 to the power 16 meter. So this is what is known as the things which are used to measure length. And then how do we measure mass? That's the next topic. How do we measure mass? How do we measure mass? So what is the unit of mass? It's kilogram. Okay, so what's a unit of mass? It's kilogram, and we know that the basic things which are used to measure mass are physical balance, and for very small things like atoms and molecules, you can't measure them in kg. Am I right? So the units are not appropriate for everything. The atoms and the masses of atoms and molecules can't be stated in kg. Instead, they have to be stated in U. That is unified atomic mass. So the unit for representing the mass of atoms and molecules is unified atomic mass, and it's nothing but 1 U is equal to 1/12 of the mass of 1 atom of carbon 12 isotope. That is 1 U. How do they define 1 U? 1/12 of mass of 1 atom of carbon isotope 12. That is, there are a lot of isotopes of carbon which are available. So one among those isotopes is carbon 12 isotope. So the carbon 12 isotopes one atom's mass, if you divide it by 12, you will be getting the value of U. Okay, so the value is 1.66 into 10 power minus 27 kilograms. 1 U. 1.66 into 10 power minus 27 kilograms. So this is 1/12 mass of one atom of carbon plus mass of electrons if needed, because they are very negligible. The mass of electrons are very negligible. If you want, you can add them also. So I told you about physical balance and mass of universal bodies. They can be measured by gravitational method. So universal bodies like planets and the stars and all that, their mass can be measured by gravitational method, which we will be discussing later in a later topic. Okay, and the very small things, the very small objects can be measured by an instrument known as mass spectrometer. Mass spectrometer. So for example, if you take an electron, okay, you are taking an electron and you are going to measure the mass. We know the mass of electron is 9.1 into 10 power minus 31 kilograms. And how did they find this? Electron is not very visible to be seen. Okay, it's very small. Then how did they find this mass? That's something because of mass spectrometer. So it's an instrument where you are sending electron into a field which contains both electric and magnetic field. So you are sending electron inside both an electric and magnetic field, an area which has both electric and magnetic field, you are sending an electron. So as soon as it enters here, it will project a trajectory. Am I right? It will exhibit a trajectory motion, that is a projectile motion. Am I right? Like a curve or something. So if you find the radius of this trajectory, it will be directly proportional to the mass of the particle. So this is how they measure the mass of very small particles. They just send them to the area where electric and magnetic field are present, and then it will project it will exhibit a projectile motion, and then they will find the radius, and it's directly proportional to the mass of the particle. Okay. So the range of masses is 10 power minus 30 to 10 power 55. So this we know, that is 31. If you take the whatever, so 10 power minus 30 to 10 power 55, this is the mass of an electron, that is the very lowest, and 10 power 55 is the mass of the observable universe. So this is the range, 10 power minus 30 to 10 power 55 is the range for masses. Okay, now next, how do we measure time? Measuring time. So for everything we have a standard. Am I right? In chemistry even, we know that if you want to measure the mass of an atom or something, you will be always having a standard unified mass. That is for carbon or hydrogen we'll be using, and then we'll be comparing it with some other, and then we'll be finding the mass of that atom or atom. So the same thing happens here. The atomic standard of time. Here the atomic standard of time is nothing but the vibrations produced in the cesium clock. Vibrations produced in the cesium atom. So this forms the basis for all the things which we use to measure time. So vibrations which are produced in cesium atom. So what is that? Cesium clock. It's based on the vibrations which are produced inside. Okay. So in cesium atom, the vibrations are produced inside due to the transition between two hyperfine energy levels. So the vibration in the cesium atom, so I told you that in cesium atom the vibration will take place, and that vibrations causes the transition between, so the two hyperfine energy levels, as there is a transition from this energy level to that, so what happens, the vibration is produced in the cesium atom, and that forms the basis for cesium clock. As we have the wristwatch, the normal wristwatch, and we have the balance wheel. And the vibration which are produced in the balance wheel are actually regulating the movement of the wristwatch. And in quartz wristwatch, the quartz crystal's vibration is regulating the quartz wristwatch. So the same thing happens here. So cesium clock, why do we particularly use cesium clock? What is the speciality? It's very accurate. Even we have one cesium clock in the National Physics Laboratory in New Delhi. Okay, in India it's present in National Physics Laboratory, New Delhi. Why is it more accurate? Actually, the uncertainty or the error in measuring time is just 1 in 10 to the power 13 times. So in 10 to the power 13 times, only one part it can show some kind of an uncertainty or an error. Okay, so that's why it's said to be more accurate. Okay, so in this manner, if you see, even in 1 year, the changes which can take place, that is, it may show more values or less values, not more than 3 microseconds, that is 3 into 10 power minus 6 seconds. So not more than or less than this. This is the maximum capability which the instrument can make an error. Okay, not more than this or not less than this. So this is the maximum thing, and that's very low, and it's for an year. Okay, so for a complete year, this is the maximum error which the instrument can make. So that's why cesium clock is said to be more accurate. Okay, and in cesium clock, 1 second is actually in cesium clock we actually define 1 second as the time which is taken for 91, 92, 63, 17, 70. So the time which is taken for these many vibrations to happen in a cesium atom. So these many vibrations must take place in a cesium atom, and I told you how the vibrations occur due to the transition between the two hyperfine levels of the cesium atom. So because of this transition, vibration will take place, and such a kind of vibration should take place for 9192631770 times, and that's what we call as 1 second. Okay, so that's what. And what's the unit of time? Second. It's very well known. The unit of time is second. SI unit of time is second. So the time, the range of time is 10 power minus 24 seconds to 10 power 17 seconds. So 10 power minus 24 seconds and 10 power 17 seconds. 10 power minus 24 seconds is nothing but the lifespan of a very unstable particle. Okay, very unstable particle which doesn't even exist. Such kind of an unstable particle's lifespan will be 10 power minus 24 seconds, whereas 10 power 17 seconds is the age of universe. Age of universe. Okay, so this is the range of time, the lowest and the highest. So now let's move on from this to a topic that is accuracy and precision. So what's the difference between these two words? Accuracy and precision. Okay, so let's learn this with an example. For example, I am measuring the length of an object. Okay, I am just measuring the length of an object. Say it is 3.567 centimeter. So the length of the object which I measure is 3.567 centimeter, and then actually the thing which I measure, that is the true value. We can say that is the true value which I measure. And now I am using one experiment. I am performing one experiment, that is I am using an instrument to measure its length. Okay, I am using another one instrument to check if my readings are right, and the resolution is 0.1 centimeter here. So the resolution with which the instrument is measuring the thing which I have to measure is 0.1 centimeter. So the resolution of the instrument is 0.1 centimeter. So now when I measure, the answer comes out to be 3.4 centimeter. Okay, so this is the resolution or the limit to which the instrument can measure. And then this is the value which I have got. And in experiment 2, I am increasing the resolution to 0.01 centimeter, and then I am getting answer as 3.3 centimeter. Okay, so this is experiment 1 and this is experiment 2. This is resolution and this is the obtained value. So here you can see, did we get a closer value to the true value? This is the true value, this is the measured value, or we can say true value. So which of these two values is closer? This is closer. Am I right? That's why it is said to be more accurate. So accuracy is nothing but the measure by which the observed value is very closer to the true value. So that is what is known as accuracy. What about precision? Precision is nothing but the measurement of the limit to which the instrument can be measured. That is its resolution. Here the resolution is low and here the resolution is high. So this is low precise, highly accurate, high precise, low accurate. Okay, so this is the difference. So accuracy is this and precision is this. we have to move to the another topic. That is we have to learn about error. So error is nothing but uncertainty in measuring things. Whenever we find a mistake or an uncertainty in whatever we have measured, we call it an error. So every calculated quantity has an error. Okay, there are no exceptions. Every calculated quantity has an error. And the errors are of two types. They are systematic and random errors. Systematic errors and random errors. So the first type under systematic is instrumental errors. So the word itself says instrumental errors. So it's not the mistake which is committed by the person who is measuring, but it's committed by the instrument which is measuring things. Okay, so instrumental error, for example, zero error. For example, in vernier caliper, the zero has to actually lie in the main scale, but if it doesn't, it's just slightly away from the zero of the main scale, then there is a zero error. Okay, so such kind of errors which are already present in the instrument with which we are going to measure is known as instrumental error, which is coming under systematic. And then the next thing is experimental procedure, an error in the experimental procedure. For example, I am going to calculate my body's temperature. So if I am placing the thermometer under my armpit, always the temperature is going to be 100% lesser than the actual body temperature. Okay, so the way that the procedure that we do things also determines the error. So that is what is known as experimental procedure. How we are doing things, that also determines what kind of errors we make. And the third thing is personal errors. Personal errors. So personal errors is nothing but errors which are committed due to the person's carelessness and ignorance. For example, when we are looking at errors in optics, so if we are just not concentrating on it so much and just having my head like this or like this, then some kind of a parallax error can occur. So these three are systematic errors. So what is random error? Random error is nothing but it's not very certain that this error will take place. It's unpredictable. Okay, sometimes you will be doing an experiment for one time, and the next time you will be repeating the same experiment, but the observations will be different. Okay, the values which come out will be so different. Okay, this must have occurred for you also. Even for me it has occurred. For the first time I will be doing and I will be getting 2.5, and the next time I will be getting 3.5. So that kind of an error is known as random error, and it's unpredictable. The fluctuations in temperature or the fluctuations during the circuit experiments, like things like the error which occurs in wattage drops, that they are not committed by any of these three. Okay, so that's what comes under random error. And then we have to know about another error, least count error, which is common to both of these categories. At times it belongs to systematic, and at times it goes to random. Least count, for that we must first know what is least count. That is the smallest measurement that an instrument can ever make. For example, if you are taking vernier caliper, 0.1 centimeter is the 0.01 centimeter is the least measurement that the vernier caliper can make. So that is known as least count. And for sperometer it is 0.001 centimeter for sperometer. This is for vernier caliper and this is for sperometer. So this kind of least count, so that is if there is some error in the least count, that is something which comes under instrument. So it's systematic and at times it's also random. So this is what is known as least count error, if there are some changes which occur in the least count. So how can we minimize these kind of errors? For example, how can we minimize systematic errors? We can minimize systematic errors by being more careful to avoid personal errors, and we have to adopt more good experimental techniques to avoid experimental errors, and then we have to use very good instruments, very equipped instruments to avoid instrumental errors. So this is the thing, and then the main thing is that we have to make the necessary corrections. For example, if you have find out an error, for example it's negative, the error is negative, then the correction which you make must be positive. If the error is positive, then the correction which you make must be negative, so that to bring it to the normal state or to zero. Okay, so you have to bring it to zero error. So that's it. So that's how we can minimize these kind of errors. And least count error can be minimized by using more precise instruments, and then we have to use more experimentally productive instruments. Also, we have the very important thing which can minimize least count error is that we have to take a lot of readings for an experiment. We have to take nearly 5 or 6 readings, and then you have to find the arithmetic mean of all of them. Okay, you know how to find the arithmetic mean. For example, if I am doing an experiment and I am getting 5 values, okay, 5 different values, or some of them may be similar, that's not an issue. So I am getting 5 values by doing an experiment, and if I add all of of them and divided by the number of, that is here I have done 5, so the number of observations, so we will be getting the arithmetic mean, and that will be more accurate. Okay, so that's what we have to do by finding the arithmetic mean. These kind of errors, generally by finding the arithmetic mean, all these kind of errors can be avoided. So next we have to move to types of errors. Types. What are the types of errors? So as I told you, if I am doing an experiment, then I will have values like A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, and the mean is nothing but addition of all of them divided by the number of observations. So this is what is known as mean. But the first type of error is absolute error. Absolute error is nothing but, so this is the observed value, am I right? That is the observed value, and then we will have one more value which is known as the true value, right? So we will have one more value which is known as the true value, A true. So I can also tell that it will be the average value. Mostly the average value will be the correct exact value. So let us take A true as A mean, that is the value, the true value as the mean value. Then absolute error can be written as the representation of absolute error is delta A. So delta A modulus, so delta A, when you draw modulus, you can come to a conclusion that whatever it is, if it's negative or positive, it will always turn out to be positive. So delta A is nothing but, if you are doing it for this, I am going to calculate absolute error for the first one, then I will be writing the value which I got minus the mean value. So this is what, for example, if I am doing it for delta A to absolute error, then the value which I got minus the mean value. Okay, so this is how you find the absolute error. That is nothing but the difference between the observed value and the mean value or the true value is known as absolute error. And if you are adding all of them, like delta A1 modulus plus delta A2 modulus plus and so on, delta AN modulus divided by n, then that will be known as mean absolute error. So this is known as mean absolute error, and this is known as absolute error. Okay. So the next thing is, and this thing, this is always positive. Okay, this is always positive, but if you calculate this or this, they may be negative, but that will always turn out to be positive.